So welcome everyone. We have some familiar faces on the call and we have some people who are new to Heart of the City. So welcome to you both. We're here today to help you learn a bit more about measuring your carbon footprint and how we can help. So for those who don't know, Heart of the City is a not-for-profit and we work with small businesses, and small businesses are anyone who have less than 250 employees, and we work with businesses from across the UK and in different industries. We have 2 courses available and both of these are there to help your business become more sustainable. We have a climate action toolkit that will take you step by step on how to measure and reduce your carbon footprint. And you'll hear a little bit more about that later. And all these details are on our website, and we are here to help if you have any questions. I think I will be passing to my colleague in a second, Laura. There's no more introductions. We do have a place where you can add questions throughout the session. We will try and get to them at the end. If we don't, we'll do it in our follow-up email. So do please add questions as they come up. So Laura, over to you.
Unmute myself. Thank you, Olivia. So today I'm going to talk to you about carbon data and how you go about measuring your carbon footprint. So if we go on to the next slide, I think it just says who I am. And the next one, please. I'm Laura and I manage our net zero program here at Heart of the City. So I know that it can be really confusing when someone says you need to measure your carbon footprint, or you decided to and you're just kind of like deer in headlights, where do I start? So hopefully today's session will help you with that. But what I really want to do is take this time to show you a bit more behind the scenes of a carbon footprint and the way you calculate it and what's really involved in the process. And I'll show you examples along the way. This is for a few reasons. One, because it's quite, how you measure your carbon footprint is really unique to your business, and there is not a one size fits all approach at all. So it's kind of misleading if you hear someone saying, I can tell you how to do it, and tells you one exact way how to measure your footprint and expect everyone to measure it the same. So by going behind the scenes and showing you a bit more of the process, you'll be able to then really understand what's involved and hopefully make some more informed decisions about choosing different calculators or softwares that you may be using to measure your carbon footprint. So I will be sharing a lot of information with you today, some technical, some not, depending also on what role you're in within your business. You may know some or you may not. So don't worry, I'm here to help, and we'll also be showing you some resources at the end which will also help you. So I'm going to start off with a poll to see where you're currently at on your carbon measurement journey. There are no wrong answers at all. It's okay no matter where you are, whether you're already measuring your footprint or whether you're just getting started. So hopefully that will pop up on your screen. Here we go. So it's whether you've measured it yourselves. So you may have someone internally within your company doing it. You may have had a consultant come in or something similar to help you. You may be doing it now and you may not have started. So I'll give you some time to answer that and we can see the answers. So Katie, whenever we've had kind of enough answers come in, we share the results. And we can see, but it may be, I mean, I'm sure we'll have a spread between them, but it's always good to get a feel of the room. But if you've had consultants come in to help you measure your footprint, you may not understand the whole process, and it will help you better understand and maybe be able to talk to the consultants a bit better. And some of you who are just getting started and are really thinking about the process and what steps to take, you'll be able to understand your options better as well. Great. So yeah, as suspected, there is a mix between a lot of them, and actually a large percentage haven't measured their footprint yet. So don't worry at all. That's what this session is for, so that you're in the right place. So if we go on to the next slide, please. I'm going to be going through the scopes really briefly to tell you about what a carbon footprint is. We have other webinars that go into this in a lot more detail, so do look out for those if you want to understand more. But essentially, your carbon footprint as a business includes absolutely everything you do that makes your business run. So that's from any products you make, any materials you use, to the laptops you issue employees, to your employees commuting to work. Everything that makes your business kind of tick along, that's included in your carbon footprint measurements. There's three areas, and they are conveniently called Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. And that's all to do with the level of ownership that you have and control you have over those certain areas. So Scope 1 is the most control and the most kind of ownership. And then you go work your way down to Scope 3, which you have the least control and the least ownership over. There's an image within each of the categories, or for each category, which represents a category. There's nearly 20 overall, 15 of those being within Scope 3, and all of those added together equal your carbon footprint. But the complex part really is understanding how you take your day-to-day business operations and your business as usual, so your employees commuting to work, or I've mentioned your laptops you issue, and taking that from a number of different sites. If you have different offices or your number of different departments who all do work slightly differently and encompassing all of your employees, and how do you take all of that activity and turn it into one number at the end, which is known as your carbon footprint? So it can seem overwhelming at first, but that's what I'm here to tell you today. So on the next slide, it shows you that there are really two overarching bits of data that you need to measure your carbon footprint, and they are termed activity data and emissions factors. And when you have those two bits of information, it's conveniently set out in a really simple equation that you need to do, and you get your output in carbon dioxide equivalent. So your activity data is your business operation data. That's the day-to-day workings of your business. That's unique to your business. So some examples for that would be, which I presume most people have, would be like your electricity. So that would be the amount of electricity you use as your business, and you normally find that data in kilowatt hours. So that's the day-to-day data that you collect. Another example is business travel, for example. That kind of activity data would be around the mode of transport that you're taking. So, for example, a car, a plane, a train. It would be around the distance of that mode of transport traveled, or the amount spent on a ticket, for example. So it's all stuff that's unique to your business to have that activity. For the 20 categories I mentioned shown in the different scopes, there'll be different sets of data for each one of those, and it will look completely different for each one. And I will come on to activity and emissions more detailed on the next slides. This is just a bit of a high-level overview first. And then the emissions factors, that's the second bit of data you need. That's a number that converts your activity data into greenhouse gas emissions, and it gives you the output in carbon dioxide equivalent. Really briefly, as I'm saying carbon dioxide equivalent, just to mention, that takes into account all of the other gases that are released due to your business activities. So there are 7 in total. It's not just carbon dioxide, it's things like methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons. There's lots of different gases that are released. And essentially what scientists do is they research the different gases and they make it relative into carbon dioxide and call it carbon dioxide equivalents. That really you only need to measure one footprint, which is a godsend, because otherwise we'd be measuring 7 different footprints. So I don't want to confuse things there, but that's why it's carbon dioxide equivalent, which is the CO2e. So yeah, to summarize, activity data is unique to your business, and the emissions factors are factors that are out there that convert the activity data, and they are essentially the same for everyone. No matter what business you're in, those emissions factors will be the same. You then complete this equation, so you times activity data, emissions factors, and you get your outputs. And if you click again on the slide, what will happen is you do this equation for each of those 20 different categories. And what you'll see is I put 4 on the slide here, but when you have the 20, you add them all together and that equals your carbon footprint. So you do an equation for each line, get the output in CO2e, add them all together to get that one number at the end, which is your carbon footprint. So I have made carbon footprint measurement seem so easy in this diagram, but there is a bit more to it than that. So on the next slide, I will go into the activity data in more detail. So this is a bit of a deeper dive. So there are two types of activity data really that you can collect, and that's primary and secondary data. And there's a sliding scale between the two of accuracy, and it's the same type of primary and secondary data in whatever you do. That primary is the most accurate, it's from the source, it's actual data, and secondary is a bit less accurate. So yeah, primary data is the most accurate, granular data you can get. That data relates directly to your business, and that data is where you get it firsthand for the specific activity. It's normally provided by your suppliers, but because of that, it's normally the most time-consuming type of data that you can collect. So it's the most granular type, but it's also the most time-consuming. On the other end of the scale, we have secondary data. This is generally less accurate data, but also generally it's less time consuming to collect. And it's essentially any data that isn't specific to the activity that you're directly measuring. So some examples of secondary data include things like industry averages and proxy data that you can find online. It can be from published databases, it can be from industry associations, it can be from trade bodies, white papers. Essentially, it can be from anywhere, just to make sure that it's a reputable source. And make a note of where you collect that data from. Proxy data that I've mentioned as a form of secondary data is also something that you can work with to make it more representative to your business activities and what you're measuring. So you can find some proxy data and you can extrapolate that data to make it relevant for you. You can scale it up, you can customize it, and so yeah, there is leeway to make proxy data more accurate and slide up towards the primary data on that scale. So as I mentioned, it is a sliding scale and you can be anywhere within that scale. And I put hybrid on the screen, and that's a mix of both primary and secondary data. So I'm going to use an example to make this a bit more relevant and a bit more what you would see in your business. So within scope 2, there was a category there called electricity, and that's something that you'll measure as part of your footprint. So an example of primary data for this is the supplier specific one, which is really granular and accurate to your business. So an example of primary data would be your meter readings. So for your building or your floor or whatever you're on, you would get meter readings, and that would be 100% kind of accurate primary data. The secondary data, you'd be looking at more averages. So there are white papers out there, there's industry averages out there, which will tell you, for example, if you can't find your meter reading or you just can't get it, if you have a landlord and they're not able to provide you with that information, you can use these industry averages. And again, there's a sliding scale of accuracy, but there are ones that will tell you, depending on your floor space of your office area, what average energy meter reading would look like. So you can measure your floor space area, look at the industry average, and use that as that proxy data. There's also ones out there, data sets out there, where you can actually say, this is our floor space, this is what industry we're in, this is how many employees we have, and it will give you also another average kilowatt hours of electricity consumed. So that's a bit more of a detailed proxy figure, lining to that sliding scale of secondary data. And hybrid, I won't forget that. That's where, for example, for electricity, you would have two offices and you have data for one office. You've been able to collect your meter readings, so you have primary data for that. But for your other office, you just can't get hold of that data. So what you can do is you can use your primary data from the first office, and again, use whether it be your floor space, your floor area, number of employees, a relative factor that you have between the two offices, and extrapolate that data to make it relevant to your second office space. So again, it's a bit of a proxy figure, a bit of an average, but it's a much more robust form of secondary data than a general industry average, and that's where it's classed as a hybrid bit of data. So there's that sliding scale, if you can see, of the type of activity data that you can collect. And this is the same for all 20 categories within your carbon footprint, that there's a really granular way to measure everything. There's a really averaged out way to measure everything, and there's a middle ground as well. So on to the next slide. What there is for activity data, there's a huge number of factors actually that will impact where your data will fall within that scale, and will impact whether you use primary, secondary, hybrid data. They all do interlink, and I've put a few on the screen to run through with you. And these are things that you'll start thinking about when you're measuring your footprint as to what type of data and what accuracy of data you need to collect. So for the first one, I've written data availability. It's quite self-explanatory, but essentially if you don't have the data, you're not able to measure it. So it's really looking, when you first start measuring your carbon footprint or later down the line, at what data do you actually have available within your business. For electricity, do you already collect meter readings? And if you do, you can use that data. For your business travel, do you already collect information through expenses, for example? So there's some examples, but it's looking at what data do you actually right now have available within your business and can use it. If you have that primary data, it's a really good idea to use it. But as I talk through the rest of the points on the slide, you may see that sometimes you may not use 100% primary data. The second bullet point is materiality. So when you're measuring your carbon footprint, it's really important to understand kind of the materiality, but kind of the effort and impact of measuring your footprint or certain areas within it. So you should be looking to get the most accurate data possible in what you do the most of, whether that be in your operations, so what you actually do the most of. If you're a manufacturer producing parts, potentially it's that. So looking at what kind of is your business renowned for, what takes up the most time, and that's one part of materiality. But also looking at the impact. So what do you physically have control and influence over changing? Because if you have absolutely no control and influence over it, there's not much point when you're earlier on in your carbon footprint journey getting really accurate data to measure it, and you get a really pretty picture, but actually you can't make any difference within that. So you want to spend the time and all the effort that you have measuring areas that you can then go on and make an impact on. So it's looking at the materiality. So yeah, if it's material to your business, you should be looking at collecting much more primary data. What's next? Capacity. This kind of links to materiality, but if you have the capacity and you can measure 100% primary data, go for it. But if you don't have the capacity, that's linked to the materiality of looking at, in the short time you have or the short resource that you have, what will make the most impact. So looking at, again, the impact, the effort, and the business operation. So what you do the most of. The size of your business will also have an effect. So I'm putting this here purely actually down to the fact of volume of information that you need to collect and volume of data. And actually, in the size of a business, it's actually easier for a smaller business to measure more accurately and collect more primary data. So if you're a business with, say at Heart of the City, we have 8 employees, it's much easier for me to measure primary data for everything because there's only 8 of us. So collecting, for example, business travel data for 8 people is much easier than if you're in an international multi-conglomerate company where you have thousands of employees. It's not going to be feasible to collect the same level of data as a team of 8. So looking at the size of business and what's possible will also impact that data and where you fall on that sliding scale. Next is maturity of footprint. So when you're measuring your first carbon footprint, most people, and it's actually advised to be further down the scale towards the secondary data because it's less time consuming. So you can quickly measure a first carbon footprint. And then what you can do is look at the data from that and make informed decisions about your process going forward, about how you measure. And so the longer you've been measuring your footprint for, the more you should be sliding up the scale towards the primary data. So that will also have an impact on the type of data you collect. And I popped in reporting requirements as well. So it's worth looking at what you're already reporting on, linking to the data availability. But if you're having to report on information already, for example, the SECR, if you're a large business, you're already having to collect your electricity data, which means you have that data available and you can report on that 100% primary data. So all of these, 6 bullet points interlink, and it's worth for each of the 20 categories in that image and diagram I showed you, really mapping out what data do you have? Is this material to our business? Can we collect this easily to determine where on that sliding scale of activity data you would fall, and what you would collect the really, really accurate data for, and what you would collect the more average, less accurate data for. So overall, measuring your carbon footprint is about being pragmatic. There are playoffs between accuracy and time commitment, and it's seeing what's realistic for you to do. But the end goal of a carbon footprint is that it does give you a certain level of data so that you can take actions to reduce your impact on the environment. So you don't want to just collect data that will sit in a report looking pretty, whether that be secondary data or primary data. That's not going to change anything. The whole point of measuring your carbon footprint is you then use that data to make informed decisions about investing in carbon saving initiatives. So it's really understanding how the level of data that you'll feel comfortable with making decisions on, because that can come with financial implications with investing in technologies, for example. So it's looking pragmatically at that and really understanding, again, your business's comfortability level with that data. So yeah, essentially, we're using 100% really averaged out data for kind of 10 years. You're not going to feel comfortable making financial decisions and really big business decisions based on that. But flipping it on its head, you also don't necessarily want to spend loads of time collecting 100% primary data that's really great and it makes a really good carbon footprint. But the time it takes you to do that means you're not spending any time on the actions of reducing your carbon footprint. So it's making sure you get a good enough, robust carbon footprint, but it's really then that you have enough time to focus on the actual impact of why you're measuring your carbon footprint. And you need to find that sweet spot between so that you can make those informed decisions, but still have time to be taking action. So that's activity data, and the second part of that equation of your carbon footprint measurement looks at emissions factors. So the next slide is all around the emissions factors. Sorry. I'll briefly mention this, but as mentioned, they're numbers that convert your activity into impact on the environment. They're normally centralized bits of data that are published. You can find them online. Institutions publish data, scientists publish data, the government publish data, and it's all online. What then happens is the UK government, I'm specifically focusing on the UK here, but produces an annual emissions document, and they've done that for the past kind of 20 years. So they've got from 2002 to 2023, they have every year published online emissions factors, and you can download that and use that. They take the third-party data sets, white papers, resources, all the information they can find, and publish that so that it's easy for businesses to use, and it's a really detailed emissions factors spreadsheets. What you'll most likely be accessing as a business if you're doing this yourself are carbon calculators, and there are hundreds, if not thousands of them out there. There's so many that it can make your head hurt. They're all slightly different in terms of what activity data they ask for. That's the data that you input, and because of that, they give you different outputs. But just to mention, they all do pretty much take the government emissions factors and put that into their carbon calculator. But the simplest way I can explain it is that they are pitched at different levels. There are some really high level, easy to use carbon calculators, and then some really granular ones as well. And that's linked to the activity data. So I'm going to take this time to just show you some examples of these documents. So the next slide is a snapshot from the UK Government Emissions Factors document. You don't need to read all the lines that are there, but it's an Excel sheet that you can download. And on the bottom, they have different tabs for each of the 20 categories I showed you on that first diagram. It's in loads of detail, and what you can see, so what I'm showing you here is business travel for land, and this is just one snapshot of cars. So it goes into trains, buses, but this is for cars, and it goes into such a level of detail. You can see that you can divide it up by a luxury car, a state car, a 4x4 car, whether it's petrol, diesel, or hybrid or electric for the fuel type for the running. And what you would do is you'd get your activity data, so you need to collect what type of car it is, the distance it travels, and the fuel type to be able to use this spreadsheet. But really what I want to show you is just that it goes into a really granular level of detail, and to use this, you would be on that primary end of that activity data scale. The next one I will show you is one called Climate Impact Partners. So they have something called a small business calculator. What they do is they take that government spreadsheet and they make it into a really user-friendly way, because the spreadsheet's quite overwhelming if you're not familiar with Excel or you don't like it. It's a lot of data. So you can see this is much more user-friendly and much more simple to use, as many other calculators. And on here, you can see that the top line, you put in your activity data. So for example, your car, so that's the road transport, and you put in the fuel types. That's the petrol, diesel, electric vehicle, hybrid, for example, and it will give you an output. And what they do is they take an average of the estate, the 4x4, the luxury, the mini, and create one figure, so that you don't have to collect as much data. So what they do is they base it off the emissions from the government, but they average it out so that you don't have to collect as much data, and it's a bit more user friendly. Because of that, it's slightly less accurate than the government's spreadsheet, but yeah, it's quicker and easier to use. Speeding along, I will head on to the next one, which is called normative. This is another example of a carbon calculator. This is what the UK government signposted to on the SME Climate Hub. And this is another example focusing on business travel. And you can see here that there's a line for car rental. And in this one, you put in the amount you spend on car rentals. So if you don't have the data, so the primary data on the type of car, the distance traveled, and the fuel, but you only have data on how much you've spent on, for example, taxis or fuel that you've used in cars, you can use this calculator. It's less accurate because you're not using that 100% primary data. This is actually right down the other end of the scale towards the secondary data. And what they do again is they use the government emissions factor, average it out, but they also have a second averaged out portion of data. And they look at, for example, a £10 train ticket, on average, it travels a distance of 50 kilometres, and they would assign an emissions factor to that. So it's the least accurate way of doing it. There's a place for all of these, and all of these calculators, and for the different levels and granular detail that you go into, or not granular detail, and that will be based upon the 6 bullet points I mentioned, from activity data all the way down to reporting requirements, data available to reporting requirements. And really last slide, I'm going to run through an example with actual figures put in so you can see. So at the top, you can see the sliding scale of accuracy of activity data and the 3 calculators I've mentioned. This is based on my actual commute. And you can see that on the normative one, I've put in how much I spend in a day, and it gives you an output. And I did an average of 1 day in the office a week. I used the government spreadsheet and actually counted the amount of days I was in the office as 100% accurate. I measured exactly the contours of the train and I got an output. And in the middle, I did a average 1 day a week in the office and an as the crow flies measurement from my start to end destination. And you can see the variation in output there. And this links really nicely to the data availability that you have to measure your footprint, but also links to the materiality. For example, as you can see, between the mid-level kind of hybrid range and the primary data, there is not a significant difference in the output, but there is a really big difference to that secondary level data. So if employee commuting was material to your business, you may want to use one of the more accurate calculators. That is a really whistle-stop tour from me on the behind the scenes of measuring your carbon footprint. I do want to mention on the next slide that Heart of the City have a toolkit available. So what we do is we help you through measuring your carbon footprint on a really practical steps, and we take you through understanding it and measuring your footprint to creating an action plan. And within this, we actually use that mid-range calculator, which is Climate Impact Partners, and help you understand the data that you need to put into that and how to collect the different levels of data. And on the next slide, it's just an example of that. So we tell you what you need to collect, the metrics that it needs to be in, potentially where in your business you'd look for that data, and also how to collect average secondary data if that's not available to you in the form of primary data. So Olivia will speak a bit more about Heart of the City at the end, but that's a really, really whistle-stop tour of carbon footprint measurements and the support we offer. So I'm going to hand over on the next slide, please, to Ellie, who is at the Lift Consultancy. And Ellie has actually been through Heart of the City's programme and has used our support and I don't want to spoil it actually, but they've measured their footprint, and Ellie's going to talk you through their journey with that so you can see that it is possible and any tips that they have for you. So Ellie, I will hand over to you.
Thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Ellie and I'm a junior consultant at the Lift Consultancy, and we are an engineering firm based in London. So we're quite a small company, there's only 15 of us and we're based UK wide. And when I started, one of our directors tasked me with the CSR role. So go to the next slide, please. So yeah, we do all escalators and elevators and all that good stuff, but we have our head office and then we have sites based all over the UK. So when I was given this task of tracking the carbon footprint, I was thinking, how am I going to do this? Because we've got a million sites all over the place. If you go to the next slide, please. Heart of the City broke it down really well. So in our timeline, we've managed to do it in less than a year. So we started in 2021 with Heart of the City. That was before I joined the company. I then started in February 2022, and by July we had measured everything in terms of our baseline and got it sent off and confirmed by Heart of the City and the carbon calculator that we used. And then from there, we were straight into, we got 3 electric cars for our high mileage consultants out on the road. We had all of the Heart of the City modules completed as well by August, just following that. The next step after getting our baseline confirmed from Heart of the City was to then submit it to somewhere else external. And then they verified our baseline and gave us a target, which was then validated and published in November. And now we're onto our action plan and seeing how we're going to measure our baseline for each year and go on to reducing from there. We have the next slide, please. Oh yeah, and we created our internal emissions tracker. So the modules that we were on included jargon busting and demystification, which was really good for us because when I started this, I didn't have any idea about anything to do with getting a company to carbon neutral. And, you know, my boss was really ambitious. This was really something they wanted. And he was talking about having a Lift Consultancy forest somewhere. So I really didn't know where to start. So that was a really great place. And then we had building a business case, measuring our carbon footprint and the net zero and the next steps. So they covered everything from the start to the end and went through it quite slowly. We had lots of meetings and webinars and things that went through everything in detail. So it was quite easily to pick up. And I found knowing that we had mini deadlines for things was quite helpful to keep track of what I was doing myself. Because when this is like a desk, the side of the desk job for me, so it's quite easy to put it to one side and not focus on it when you've got your day-to-day. And knowing that with Heart of the City, I had deadlines to me, that I made sure that each week I put time aside to make sure that I was getting this done. Have the next part, please. So after we did everything to do with our baseline, we had to come up with an action plan, and we used the Heart of the City template, which meant we could audit our office. So it's kind of like a spreadsheet checklist that we could go through and check our lighting, our glazing, talking to our building manager because we rent our office, seeing about our fleet of cars for our consultants that travel to site. We have under the desk bins that has been a reoccurring issue trying to get rid of. So we have our main recycling and our general waste, but whenever everyone puts things in their under the desk bin, it then doesn't get organised into separate bits. We had to meet with our building manager regarding our office lights because they were fluorescent bulbs, and we managed to get those changed to low energy LED lights. So that helped. And we then created a way to look at our future year's emissions, which was the emissions tracker that I spoke about earlier. So now we have a tracker on a spreadsheet split into scopes and our different areas within the scopes and how much emissions we produce in each area. So then when we have future years, so we use the baseline 2021, so when we see our numbers from 2022, 23, 24, we'll see whether they are decreasing and that we are meeting our baseline and with our target, and with the science-based targets, we committed to reducing 42% by 2030. So hopefully we'll see that decline on our emissions tracker. Have the next slide, please. So we've been now using some outside professional services to help because, as I said, this isn't on the side, the CSR was an on the side job to my main role, and getting all the information together is quite time consuming. So we've been looking at Carbon Neutral Britain and other companies that help come in and do the audits for us and help looking at things like offsets for areas of our carbon footprint that we can't reduce ourselves. Like I said, we have a rented building, so there's only so much we can change. We can't change the gas and electric that they use, and we can't change making, windows and glazing and things like that. So there is a point that we had to stop and say, well, that's actually out of our control. And with travel as well, where we have men driving out to site, even though we can get electric or hybrid cars, there is still going to be something there of their on-site emissions that we just couldn't reduce. So we had lots of meetings with Laura and talking about, how we navigated that, because it is a jungle and, you've got to look at different companies. They say that they're offering things when it's not what it actually sounds like. You have offsets that are really, really old, so they're not really doing much, and newer offsets and things. So we needed to find a really sustainable solution that we could use in our company. Have the next slide, please. So this is what we found hard in our journey. We actually found it quite difficult to get our building manager on board, especially when we had the spreadsheet tools from Heart of the City and we were sending them to the building manager. They didn't really want to give us too much information, and some of the information when we looked at our electric and our gas was difficult for them to separate from the other offices because they just had an overall bill. So that did take some time, but we actually have had them come into our office recently saying that they think that they might want to do it too for the entire building and asked for our help to get involved. So it has worked out well in the end. And that included with the electricity and waste. And then, like I said, getting rid of the under desk bins is so difficult. None of the admin want the desk bins removed. I think it's just very convenient for them. And like nearly a year down the line, the under desk bins are unfortunately still there, but we are working on it. And then as well, tracking our purchase services and goods was really difficult because we're a very small SME, there's only 15 of us. So when we need any office supplies or we're booking consultant travels on train or on a flight, we'll just go directly to EasyJet or Amazon to order something or go on Trainline. So we have one person, I accounts department, and they had to go backdate everything to see how much money we were ordering from Amazon to then work out what our purchase services and goods are. So in the future, we've been looking at different apps, integrating Pleo and QuickBooks and things like that to track our purchase services and goods. So in the future, it's easier to see how much we're ordering. And also, instead of just seeing, oh, we need some pens, I'll order some pens, actually wait until we've got a long list of things if we're going to order things. So it's not lots of short journeys of creating more emissions. It's, you know, one big order at the beginning of the year that will hopefully last us, say, 4 or 5 months before we need to do it again. So it's just a bit more planning ahead. And the next slide, please. And then what we found easy, so getting everyone at TLC on board was easy because when I started here, they had already signed up with Heart of the City, and the director that I work with, Gabriel, was really keen on it. We had lots of meetings. He has some really big ambitions and things. The only thing was, of course, getting rid of the underdesk bins. Monitoring our progress did become quite easy with all the tools that Heart of the City had with the spreadsheets and templates and things. So we could see what we had done, what needed to be done, and it was really easy to just reach out and have conversations with people, especially on the webinars. When you go into breakout rooms, you're speaking to other companies that are in the same position as you, and hearing what they have or haven't done is quite reassuring to know where you are on your journey. And then that was the same with the action plan, where we had the toolkit from Heart of the City. We had a checklist. It was really easy to see, right, that's done. This is a small win. This is a long-term win, and what we could do from there. And that was the same with following the Heart of the City process. As you go down through the modules, it's really clearly set out what has been done, what needs to be done, what you've completed, and what you need to do to get to the next task. And actually submitting our baseline was quite easy as well. Where we're an SME, there's a smaller section on the science-based targets website compared to the bigger companies. So we had some forms to fill out, but once we'd already had our carbon calculator and our baseline approved by Heart of the City, we already had all the documents written out. So we sent that off, and they came back and confirmed that within 2 weeks. So that was quite good as well. Okay, the next slide, please. So thank you for listening to that. Is there any questions from anybody?
Thanks, Ellie. I'm afraid we probably don't have time for questions just because we're running out of time, but thank you so much for presenting and showing everyone that SMEs can do this, and you've been a star on our programme, so thank you so much.